I am being watched. Welcome, everyone, to my review of Person of Interest, Season 1, Episode 14. It's called Wolf and Cub. Now, I only just noticed the title. I only just checked the title. I didn't see it beforehand. And it makes a lot of sense, actually, given what this episode has in it, which is an episode where they get a number. After coming back to the library for the first time, not the public library from last episode, but their secret library that Finch usually works out of. And just being really cautious just in case anyone's there because of all the root stuff from last episode. But they get this number for this 14-year-old, and when Reese goes to check the apartment where he lives, has it's all crime tape. There's been something's happened here. Turns out this kid's older brother, who was his legal guardian, was shot in a retaliation for sticking up for a waitress. Basically, I mean the episode doesn't even really revolve around like the reasons for it, but this kid's on the run, and he is ultimately going to try and get revenge for his brother by going after the three thugs that killed him. And Reese intervenes and ends up kind of taking this kid under his wing. He tries to get rid of him, like to Fusco, into like a sort of foster home first, but the kid sort of escapes again and keeps getting involved. So ultimately, Reese kind of agrees to sort of keep him around and take on his case. Not to kill the people who killed his brother, he makes that clear, but that he will deal with it, which he was going to do anyway, of course, but the kid's refusing to not be at least somewhat involved and be present. So and despite the fact that Finch says this is a terrible idea, Carter doesn't sound too enthused when she realizes the kid's just with him either. He sort of does this because he knows the kid's not going to let it go. He knows that the only way to sort of keep the kid in somewhat check is to have him around. So but the Wolf and Cub part of this, so the kid's a fan of superhero comics and he's a fan of samurai. And in fact, when Reese is in the apartment early on, you see a Seven Samurai poster. So the kid's got taste. I'll give him that for sure. And the idea of superheroes comes up because there's a character introduced early on who runs a comic book store who turns out to be like the main villain who's like sort of in charge of all these thugs. But he sort of raises a few thematic ideas of superheroes, and it's kind of cynical when you find out later that he is the bad guy. But one of the things that the kid, whose name is Darren, once he starts to learn more about John, once he starts to learn more about Reese, he starts to ascribe some traits to him. When he realizes he's not a cop and all those things, he kind of realizes, or he describes him as a Ronin. He says that you're a Ronin who lost your master because you don't work for anyone anymore, so you just wander the land and try and help people, which is kind of what Reese does. But the interesting part of this is the other little bit that I've missed out there is that he technically, when he lost the master, should have killed himself, right? And that's not the kid's opinion. He's just talking about how seppuku. He's talking about, when a samurai loses his master, that's like part of the tradition. But the ones that don't might become Ronin, right? And fiction and lore. And this was kind of interesting because I thought it was symbolic, and because in a sense, Reese kind of died, like not literally, of course, but in the sense that he gave up everything he was and he just became this wandering homeless vagrant. Like that kind of spiritually, it was a death in a lot of ways. And then he kind of got brought back from the dead by Finch and by a sense of purpose. And this idea that he is wandering the streets, looking to help people. It's a lot more focused than that, of course, because of the numbers, but that's effectively what his character is. I thought it was an interesting counterpoint, because, I always compare him to Batman. And there's a lot of legit comparisons to be made between this show's premise and Batman. But one of the big things that's very different, of course, is his backstory. It's not like Batman at all. So this idea of being, a warrior with a purpose that serves a master, in this case it's the government, in this case it's the military and the powers that be, and losing his way. And this is reiterated a little bit later on when the kid's asking if he's ever killed anyone, and Reese says, yeah, some of them were good, some of them were bad. And the kid immediately says, oh, so you were tricked by your master, and sort of like they dishonored you by sending you after people who didn't deserve to be killed. And that also seems to track somewhat with some of the people that Reese did have to go after, and how he kind of became disillusioned with his purpose. Because he was so gung-ho about going and serving in the military again after 9/11, but obviously by the time we meet him in 2011, he has lost his way and is disconnected from all of that. So I thought this was a really interesting way to tie Reese's character and compare it into a different type of lore and a different type of fiction that felt like, yeah, maybe this was some influence on the creation of his character, and they're having fun kind of like directly comparing it and talking about, because we think of him as an honorable character who's looking for redemption, and it kind of fits that idea of the samurai who lost his way but is now trying to help people. I really like that. And then Wolf and Cub is a reference. I mean, I don't know if it comes from anything before this, but there's a Japanese movie series called Lone Wolf and Cub, and it's very much about this samurai who starts taking care of this kid kind of against his will. It's a much younger kid. Maybe the later movies he's grown up, but in the first movie it is like a toddler, and he's protecting this toddler on a journey. A lot of people compared not Boba Fett, was the Mandalorian, that the first of the new Star Wars shows, because of Baby Yoda, and kind of there was a clear influence in Lone Wolf and Cub on that, which is kind of in keeping with Star Wars, and that even the original Star Wars is somewhat inspired by some samurai movies, namely Hidden Fortress kind of directly inspired the idea for the two droids. So yeah, I mean, that's where the Wolf and Cub part, at least to me, comes from. I mean, I don't know if Wolf and Cub's like an older idea that was put in those movies or what, but so yeah, when I say that the title makes a lot of sense to me now that I've watched the episode, that's what I mean. So the comparisons between him and a samurai tie into the Wolf and Cub stuff. And in turn, of course, Reese does give some life lessons to Darren. Darren learns some things. Darren's he was a very angry kid, understandably. He lost his brother. He tries to take revenge by shooting one of them himself, but he obviously doesn't know how to use the gun, really. He doesn't go through with it. Reese intervenes. And notably, there's this other part of it that I really like, which is that when he goes for revenge again towards the end of the episode, even after Reese has spent time with him, and he holds a gun up against like one of the main thugs who is Carter arrested earlier on, and he's been kind of in the tank for a while, but he's been let out because of corruption. I'll get into that in a bit. But this comic book store guy, Andre, who's like running the show, he actually just starts to turn on his thug and basically just tries to convince Darren to shoot him. Basically, he sees a potential new recruit in Darren. He wants to. It's like if he can convince him to shoot his old thug, he can be like, "Hey, you can work for me now. I'll protect you. I'll give you a purpose, a way of life." And it's kind of this like counter choice to like the foster care system and the potential, pursuit. Because at the end of the episode, when Reese sends him into the foster care and there's a family lined up for him, it sounds like he's going to like a good school with an arts program, and the kid likes to draw, he likes comic books, he likes music, he plays, I think it was trumpet he had at the end. Maybe a trombone. I think it was a trumpet, but it may have been a trombone. But it's like this idea that he can pursue these positive things in his life that are good influences on him. Because he's very well read. He quotes The Art of War a couple times as well. So this kid's really into his stuff, and Reese is kind of trying to encourage him into that. And sure enough, he's given this big moment. And I think this is the kind of the linchpin of the whole episode in a lot of ways, is that if we're spending a lot of this episode with Reese sort of learning a little bit from this kid, but this kid maybe taking on a lot of teachings from Reese, is that at the end, when he has got a gun in his hand and he's pointing it at one of the thugs that killed his brother, and Andre's trying to lure him to the dark side, for lack of a better term, this choice is the punctuation on the whole episode, because he doesn't do it. He hesitates, he's not going to go through with it, and Andre grabs the gun and says, "I thought that might happen." He's disappointed in him that he won't be a soldier for him. These episodes, when we've got these like guest characters who are here for their one story, and obviously I always talk about how the themes of the character tie into, either Reese or Finch and what they're going through. But the episodes really succeed when the story itself is compelling and there's a good narrative point by the end. And it's the fact that this kid has this agency to choose to either be a killer and go down the path of hatred, or to not take that path based on his his time with Reese, that he's there's been enough. Not to say that he wasn't already good before then, but the idea at this time with Reese has helped encourage him and send him down the right path. He gets to make that choice. He has this agency in this moment, and that means he's got a complete story. So despite the fact that he is quite an aggressive kid to begin with, and he keeps just sort of demanding for action to happen, by the end it feels like he's really grown, and it feels like Reese has helped bring out the better parts of him, and it's kind of a sweet story because of that. It's definitely not as big a deal of an episode as last time. This is definitely more of a reflective episode, but it is tackling a very different type of case again, which I appreciate. The idea that this kid wants revenge, and even technically hires Reese. He tries to give him all the money he has, and Reese takes like the one coin and says, "This is my going rate." So this makes it official. And yeah, so I enjoyed all that stuff. Yeah, there's a whole side thing here as well, where the one guy gets arrested by Carter, because Carter gets involved, of course, and the corrupt cop that we saw several episodes ago, the one that Lionel went to talk to, he actually is, working with us, Andre, and offering protection. The guy that keeps showing up on the roofs. And he comes and demands that this guy be released because there's no charges. So it's kind of clear that there's something fishy going on here. And Carter also notices that this corrupt cop knows Fusco, and even questions if she wants Fusco to come with her as backup when she's going out at the end. So that's also something there. Which, by the way, Fusco gets shot in the ass. I actually can't believe I didn't open with that. Fusco gets shot, and if I could do a Christopher Walken impression here for this, I totally would. But he gets shot in the ass. There is one little silly element to this, actually, that feels like just a caveat, just to make it clear for the comedy of the moment. So he dives to save the kid when the kid's getting shot at by Andre, and he takes a bullet in the ass. When we see him get into the stretcher, and he's got this like big bandage like on his ass cheek, and he's like, yeah, make the jokes, Carter. And the kid comes up and thanks him, and it's a sweet moment. And because Fusco, had a couple of words with him earlier on when the kid was being kind of against him when he was, because Reese tried to leave him with Fusco earlier on, and the kid didn't have too many kind words for him. So it was a nice little sort of mini arc for just them having respect for each other. Anyway, the thing I was getting at is that Fusco has this bandage on his ass to tell the audience that he was shot in the ass. But it's actually a little bit silly because the bandage is on top of his trousers, like it's on top of his pants, when I would imagine they would have cut them open at the very least to put the bandage, the temporary bandage, like immediately onto the skin. I can't imagine them just sticking the various things to his fabric. That felt kind of weird to me. I think that's just a thing where obviously they wouldn't do that, but for the sake of the joke, and it's network TV, we don't want to just have his bare ass cheek, even though they probably could get away with that. I don't think that would be crossing a line for network TV, but especially since it wouldn't be his bare ass cheek, it would be covered by the bandage. So I think he could have done it. So I don't know. It felt a bit weird, but it did add to the comedy of the moment. So I can't fault the purpose behind it, and I did get a chuckle out of it. So but I thought I'd mention that it felt a little bit off. So the Fusco stuff's good. The Fusco's also still looking into Finch. We see him looking for Finch and taking some photographs throughout the episode. And he pieces together by the end that he was going under this name Harold Wren, which we also hear in the episode, because Finch talks to Will again, his nephew type character, Ingram's son, and that has its own little thing that goes on. But Fusco is like, okay, he's been using this alias since college, but there's also no record of him before that point, meaning that it was already an alias. So it is building up a bit of mystery to Finch's character, where we understand why he's using an alias in his current line of, work. And even when he was building the machine, he was very secretive, and we understood why he understood the value of not being connected to it officially. But this is painting the idea back that he's been using aliases even since his late teens, which does raise a lot of questions as to why he was already doing that. What exactly is his origin story that led to this level of secrecy even at such a young age? So that is very interesting. So that they're looking into that. And we see Finch throughout the episode, like I say, meeting with Will, who does leave by the end of the episode, but he finds a champagne cork, or a wine cork, and it's got like a note next to it with the date that says the machine, day one. And he asks Finch about this. Finch gets all, I don't know, evasive about it. He tries to act as not natural as possible, but he's dodging the questions. But he tracks down the woman who worked for the government. We saw her in the flashbacks. The woman who was there to like buy the machine's data for $1, right? The actress who's very recognizable. Elizabeth Marvel's her name. She's popped up in other things as well. I don't know if I mentioned that when she first popped up, but she was in True Grit. She was in Lincoln, apparently. I don't remember from that specifically, but she's been in a bunch of things. She's one of those character actors who shows up in a lot. And she comes to talk to him, and she's very paranoid about tech, right? She lives in the one town in the US that has no Wi-Fi, and it's not like and it sounded like it was like a circumstantial thing, like because of some of the satellites or something that are in that town, they're not allowed to have like wireless networks or mobile networks in that town because it interferes with some satellite station or something. So it's just a knock-on effect to that. But she's specifically moved there to try and like stay off the grid. And when she comes to New York in this episode to talk to Will, she doesn't want to go indoors. She wants to stay out in the park. She wants to, she's very nervous about anyone listening in. And as soon as Will mentions that, he's got an uncle who he was talking to this about, she gets paranoid and leaves immediately. So the knock-on effect of the machine, or at least whatever like her involvement is with it, has made her very paranoid and made her want to not talk to anyone. She's staying away from the government. She doesn't want to be tied to any of this stuff. But she also keeps the lie. She doesn't tell this, Will, what the machine is or what she knows about it. She just gives him a story about how the government bailed his father out of like financial problems. And they got some patents for $1 as like a sort of an exchange for them helping him, which is a complete lie. But it shows that she's so scared of all this stuff going on that she's not even willing to give him any information. She maintains the lie. Finch is listening in, so she's actually right to be paranoid in a lot of ways because Finch is listening to her. We know that Finch isn't going to do anything bad to her, though. We know he's not going to cause her any harm. He's just monitoring to make sure Will doesn't learn anything about this machine. And I think I want to make it clear that despite all this secrecy, it does feel like Finch does care about this kid. And I say kid, he's like 30, but he does care about him, and he is sad that he's leaving at the end of the episode. Perhaps he could even get him to stay if he was honest about more things. But this kid's off seeking, some purpose around the world himself. Got no real answers about who his father was or about any of this information he's found. Not much stuff came from this Will plot, really, other than just the idea that Finch does care about someone. He still has this person that's connected to, Ingram, who he has this guilt over. So that's there. But I think the main purpose of it, in a lot of ways, is the narrative sort of irony, if you want to call it that, of him successfully, but so this has effectively been a two-part story. They've been split up a little bit between a few episodes, but this stuff with Will looking into Ingram, his father, is very much been a two-part story. We get interested at this character in one episode, that he's looking into his father, and in this episode, he almost gets close to some answers, but it turns out to not happen. Finch's secrets are all safe, and he's leaving, presumably, not satisfied, but at least accepting that he's probably not going to get anywhere further. Finch has successfully maintained his secrets, and I think the reason why you've done that here, in part, is because this is the same time that Reese has got Fusco looking into him. So he thinks he's successfully maintained his secrecy, and at the same time, Fusco's like, hey, I've discovered all this stuff about his alias and what he's been doing publicly and stuff. So I do think the narrative lining up of those two things is very intentional, and that's why you kind of do them together, is you have him successfully keeping secrets in one plot, whilst he's unaware that in secret someone's trying to uncover his secrets behind the scenes. And yeah, so I think that's why you do that. And that's not to say that I'm critiquing this Will plot for not being good necessarily. It's definitely a subplot. It's definitely not got a lot of meat on the bone. But its purpose for Finch is solid enough. But it's definitely not been as enticing as, say, like the actual flashbacks with Ingram. Like, I think those flashbacks with Ingram are shrouded with this such, you know, mystery and secrecy, and then on top of like the extra mythology they've been adding with like seeing how the machine works, they have just been vastly more entertaining and more engaging. Whereas the Will stuff has been fine, and it's added a little bit of a dimension to Finch's character, but it's not as good as those scenes. But no, it served its purpose, and I think it makes sense that it's not probably going to go much beyond this on its own. You know, now it'll pivot into more the fact that we're looking into his past via Fusco and Reese, and maybe that'll just boil up to like Reese asking him about it and having an open conversation. Not that Finch will give straight answers unless there's a good reason to, or he is dramatically motivated to by the time it comes up. Maybe they're closer by that point and he wants to open up. There's all these possibilities. But this is nudging all that along a little bit. So yeah, I mean that's pretty much the episode. As per usual, I kind of gloss over some of the more action moments. It is fun seeing Reese go through the comic book store with his big beanbag gun, because he's not killing anyone. He promised the kid he wouldn't kill anyone. It's kind of a lesson more than anything else. So him going through with a night vision scope is this, you know, it's got some fun beats. Him stealing one of the thug's cars and then crashing back into him, and then planting the third thug in the back of a police car with a bunch of beer bottles so he'll get arrested. Yeah, also amusing, you know. So just, you know, there's some little, like, it's almost easy to gloss over the action moments, because, and it's not because they're not good, they're actually usually quite entertaining. They're just not the narratively like in-depth things that you're going to like study and analyze episode to episode, but they tend to hold up. You know, it's the last episode I forgot to mention them. Well, no, I didn't forget, but it wasn't until the very end of the review that it occurred to me, oh, I should mention him knocking the guy out with the hand dryer. Like, it came in at me at the end. Here's kind of similar, where, you know, all the interesting narrative stuff that's pushing the characters forward and all the themes are what I want to talk about first. But it is worth mentioning. There's some fun action that usually has a bit of dry humor associated with it throughout. So yeah, good. You know, in fact, it's him, like, you know, because the kid early on, after he's already run away once, the kid goes and tries to ask about the whereabouts of these two thugs that aren't, because one of them's in the police station by now. So he goes to a bar and says, hey, these two idiots, where are they? And these thugs are like, these other guys are like, hey, what? No, you don't ask about them. Like, they'll kill you. And they start to get angry. So I don't know if they're just lower down on the thug food chain or what. You know, Reese steps in and sort of helps the kid from not being, you know, getting his ass beat by these two guys. And it's seeing Reese in action and quickly like taking these two guys down very efficiently that makes the kid start to go on his path of thinking of him as a Ronin, because he's impressed. He's like, oh shit, there's a superhero, you know, working with me. And at the end, of course, he gives Reese the drawing of Reese and him, and Reese even refers to him as a sidekick. So I don't think we'll see the kid again necessarily. This feels like a nice, neat, done, tied in a bow story. I don't think he is going to show up later as like a trained fighter to actually help or anything like that. This is a neat, nice, open-ended kind of story where you hope he goes on and lives a good life. But, you know, again, the thematic purpose for Reese's story about him looking for purpose and protecting people, and especially the part where he was tricked by the people he was working for, was a really poignant observation by Darren, I thought. And really, you know, I thought it gave the episode a nice air to it. So, yeah, there you go. That is a Wolf and Cub. Episode 14 of the season. I'll be back next week with the next one. Let me know what you thought of this in the comments, and of course you can support all the content and keep the person of interest reviews coming by going to patreon.com/mailfuzztv and supporting us over there for a little bit of money. If you can't do that, don't worry. If just liking and commenting and things like that, subscribing, all these things help more people find the reviews, so please do hit the buttons and comment in the comments. But that is me, so thank you very much for joining. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?